The most dangerous people in your life are not the ones who openly despise you. They are the ones who claim to love you, protect you, and understand you. Because the knife that cuts the deepest isn't the one wielded by an enemy. It's the one placed gently in your hands, by someone you once trusted to hold your heart. Betrayal never begins with violence. It begins with warmth, with connection, with the quiet illusion that you've found safety in another human being. That illusion becomes the perfect camouflage for destruction, because the mind, in its deep hunger for belonging, lowers its defenses not when it is threatened, but when it is loved. Trust is the most sacred transaction in human existence. It is invisible, yet it shapes everything we are. From the moment we are born, our survival depends on it. We trust our parents to feed us, our teachers to guide us, our lovers to see us. But beneath this beautiful necessity lies a hidden flaw. Trust is not rational. It's instinctual. It is not earned through proof, but through perception. And perception, as Carl Jung reminds us, is the gateway to projection, the unconscious process of seeing what we want to see in others, not what is truly there. Every act of betrayal begins with a projection. We project goodness, loyalty, and love onto another person, not because they've proven it, but because our soul needs to believe in it. This is the birth of blindness, a blindness that predators understand better than anyone. Manipulators, narcissists, and even ordinary people driven by hidden desires, they all thrive in this shadow of perception. They do not attack you, they mirror you. They reflect your values, your dreams, your wounds, until you can no longer tell where you end and they begin. And in that sacred merging, you surrender your greatest weapon, discernment. That's when the betrayal begins, long before any visible act of deceit. It begins when your intuition is silenced in the name of loyalty, when your discomfort is dismissed as paranoia, when your need to believe outweighs your ability to see. The paradox of betrayal is that it cannot exist without trust, and trust cannot exist without vulnerability. The very quality that allows us to love, to connect, to build civilizations, is the same quality that allows us to be destroyed from within. This is why Jung called the human psyche a battleground between light and shadow. For within every bond lies a silent war, between the part of us that longs for connection and the part of us that fears exposure. Betrayal is not merely an act of cruelty, it is a mirror held up to that conflict. It reveals how much of our faith is built not on truth, but on illusion. It shows us how intimacy can become infiltration, and how love, when placed in the wrong hands, becomes the most effective form of control ever invented. So the real question is not why they betrayed you. The real question is, why did you need them so much that you gave them the power to? Trust is the most fragile currency of the human mind, invisible, yet powerful enough to build civilizations or destroy lives. We speak of it as a virtue, something noble, something pure. But beneath its surface lies a hidden code written deep in our biology, a code that doesn't ask whether the other person deserves it, only whether our mind needs it. From the moment we are born, our brains are wired to seek safety and connection. In infancy, the release of oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, creates an emotional imprint linking comfort with trust. A child learns that when someone responds to their cry, the world is safe. That early loop of need, relief, and attachment becomes the foundation of every relationship that follows. We grow older, but that loop never disappears. It simply evolves, shaping how we choose friends, lovers, leaders, and even ideologies. Trust, then, is not purely rational. It's emotional chemistry masquerading as moral choice. We like to think we trust people because they've earned it, but often we trust because our minds crave the calm that comes from surrendering control. That's why betrayal cuts so deep. It doesn't just break the bond between two people, it shatters the illusion of safety that the brain has worked so hard to maintain. Evolution favored trust because it increased survival. Early humans who formed tribes, who depended on others, were more likely to live through storms, predators, and scarcity. Isolation meant death. So our biology punished suspicion and rewarded belonging. The tribe became the womb of survival, and trust its heartbeat. But what happens when that same mechanism is exploited, not for survival, but for control? Manipulators, con artists, and even governments have long understood how to weaponize this instinct. They don't conquer through fear. Fear awakens resistance. They conquer through warmth, through familiarity, through the subtle language of safety. A smile, a promise, a shared belief. These are the tools that bypass logic and go straight to the limbic system, the emotional core of the brain. Once trust is triggered, skepticism shuts down. We stop questioning motives and start defending the very person who might be destroying us. In relationships, it happens quietly. A partner who lies once but cries afterward. A friend who betrays but says, "I did it because I care." The brain chooses comfort over truth because comfort feels safer. The oxytocin loop demands connection, even at the cost of self-awareness. In workplaces, loyalty to authority often blinds employees to manipulation. In politics, charismatic figures use narratives of unity and belonging to seduce the collective mind. People don't follow tyrants because they're forced to, they follow them because they trust them. Nietzsche once observed that humans are eager to be deceived. He understood that deception is not forced upon us, it's invited. Trust, in its purest form, is not proof of goodness, it is proof of our longing. We want to believe that someone, somewhere, sees us without judgment. That desire is what the deceiver feeds on. Modern psychology calls this gaslighting, the systematic erosion of someone's ability to trust their own perception. The gaslighter doesn't need to shout or threaten, they simply need to become the person the victim depends on most. Once trust is hijacked, the victim's mind becomes a house with open doors. The intruder walks in freely, rearranges the furniture, and convinces the owner it was always that way. The tragedy is not that people are betrayed, it's that they are conditioned to need the betrayer. In that need lies the true danger. Trust blinds not because it's naive, but because it fulfills something ancient within us, the longing for security, for belonging, for peace in a chaotic world. And so the paradox emerges. Trust is the foundation of all love, all cooperation, all progress. Yet it is also the easiest door to unlock. The one that doesn't creak when opened, the one that invites both the friend and the predator inside. Trust is not a sign of strength, it's an invitation. And some people only need that invitation to walk straight into your soul. Every predator begins with a smile. Not with a knife, not with a threat, but with the illusion of safety. Manipulators understand something most people never do. Trust isn't earned, it's engineered. It's not a reward for honesty, it's a formula built from predictability, empathy, and timing. The art of manipulation begins with mirroring, the ancient psychological trick of reflection. The manipulator studies you like a scientist dissects a specimen. They notice how you speak, what makes you laugh, what triggers your frustration. Then, like a chameleon, they shift their tone, their posture, even their beliefs to match yours. Suddenly, you feel seen, profoundly understood. It's an intoxicating illusion of connection. You think, finally, someone who gets me. But what's happening is far more calculated. Your emotional defenses are being dismantled, one mirror gesture at a time. Mirroring works because the human brain is wired for familiarity. We trust those who seem like us. Evolution taught us that similarity meant safety, that those who looked, acted, or believed as we did were allies, not threats. Manipulators exploit this primal bias. They don't need to be authentic. They only need to be convincing enough to fit the image of what your subconscious already wants to believe. Once they've established similarity, they move to the reciprocity trap. It starts small, a favor, a compliment, a helping hand at just the right moment. You feel grateful, maybe even touched. But what seems like kindness is a psychological hook. Human beings are programmed to return favors. It's how social order evolved. We can't stand the tension of owing someone. Manipulators weaponize that discomfort. Every gesture of generosity becomes a silent debt, every act of kindness a form of control. Before you realize it, you're saying yes, not because you want to, but because you feel you should. Then comes the next phase, confessional bonding. The manipulator begins to open up, or at least appears to. They share something vulnerable, personal, or painful. It might be a childhood story, a heartbreak, a trauma. You feel privileged to be trusted with such intimacy. You lower your guard, thinking, someone who shares this much couldn't possibly be deceitful. What you don't see is that this oversharing isn't vulnerability, it's strategy. It accelerates emotional closeness, bypassing the slow, organic growth of real trust. Once you start confiding back, your secrets become their leverage. This tactic thrives in both personal relationships and professional hierarchies. The manipulative boss who tells you about his struggles to connect with his team just before assigning you double the workload. The romantic partner who cries about abandonment, ensuring you'll never leave them no matter how toxic the relationship becomes. Every confession is a calculated move, designed not to reveal weakness, but to control perception. And then the masterstroke, future faking. The manipulator paints a vivid picture of a future that never existed, promises of love, loyalty, partnership, success. They sell a dream tailored to your desires. For some, it's emotional, we'll build a life together. For others, it's ambition, you'll rise with me. These are not lies in the conventional sense, they are psychological investments. You become so attached to the idea of that future that you ignore the evidence in the present. When the illusion crumbles, you cling tighter, believing that your loyalty might bring the promise back to life. It never does. Modern society is flooded with these predators, not just in dark alleys, but behind polished screens and perfect smiles. Influencers curate personas that simulate authenticity. They cry on camera, confess their insecurities, talk about trusting the process, while every post is a carefully engineered transaction. Political leaders wrap manipulation in empathy, pretending to share the people's pain while feeding on their devotion. Even in friendships and families, emotional trust becomes currency, traded, hoarded, and weaponized. Psychologists call this constellation of traits the dark triad: Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. The Machiavellian calculates. The narcissist seduces. The psychopath feels nothing. Together, they form the perfect architect of deception, someone who understands that control doesn't require domination, it requires dependence. And dependence is built through trust. But the truth is darker still. This predatory blueprint doesn't exist only in others. It lives in us. Every human being carries the potential to manipulate. Whenever we lie to protect our image, flatter to gain favor, or hide our intentions behind charm, we are dipping into the same reservoir. The manipulator is not a foreign species. It is a mirror reflecting the darker possibilities of human nature. We want to believe that trust is sacred, that sincerity is stronger than deceit. But the predator knows better. They know that trust isn't a shield, it's an entry point. And once they're inside, they don't need to steal anything. They simply rearrange the truth until you no longer recognize it as your own. That is the predator's blueprint, not force, not fear, but the silent mastery of belief. History remembers betrayal not as an accident, but as an inevitability, the natural decay of trust under the weight of ambition. Every empire, every dynasty, every revolution begins with faith and ends with deceit. And yet, the betrayal itself is rarely the true weapon. It's the trust that came before it, that sacred bond, which makes betrayal powerful enough to reshape the world. Consider Julius Caesar and Brutus. History has turned their story into a symbol of ultimate treachery, but few see the psychological precision beneath it. Caesar trusted Brutus like a son. He saw in him not a rival, but a reflection, someone molded in the same image of power and idealism. Brutus didn't stab Caesar because he hated him, he did it because he believed the act would purify Rome. That's what makes the betrayal timeless. It wasn't born of malice, but of conviction. Caesar's downfall wasn't the knife. It was the illusion that love and loyalty could exist untainted in the shadow of power. In that moment, Rome learned a lesson civilizations have repeated for millennia. The closer you are to power, the sharper the knives become. Trust, once granted, becomes the most valuable and the most dangerous currency in human history. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. In The Prince, he didn't teach rulers how to be moral, he taught them how to survive. The promise given was a necessity of the past, he wrote. The word broken is a necessity of the present. To Machiavelli, loyalty was a tool, not a virtue. He saw that human beings crave trust as they crave meaning, but in politics, both are illusions. His philosophy wasn't cruelty, it was realism. He knew that power operates in the shadows between truth and deception. A ruler who trusted completely would not rule for long. In the Machiavellian world, the appearance of loyalty mattered more than loyalty itself, because appearance, like trust, is perception. And perception, once controlled, becomes reality. Centuries later, the Cold War turned this ancient art into a global science. Nations discovered that you don't need to invade to conquer, you only need to make people believe you're their ally. Espionage became theater. Intelligence agencies didn't just gather secrets, they planted illusions. Trust was no longer an emotion, it was infrastructure. Propaganda machines perfected the manipulation of faith and fear. Citizens trusted their governments to protect them, while those same governments manufactured enemies to justify their control. It wasn't just soldiers or spies who played this game. Entire populations were drawn into it. Newspapers, films, and education systems became instruments of emotional conditioning. The war wasn't fought on battlefields, it was fought in minds. The most successful operations weren't the ones that stole information, but the ones that made truth indistinguishable from lies. The Soviet concept of desinformatia, disinformation, wasn't about spreading falsehoods, but about poisoning the meaning of truth itself. When people stop trusting what's real, they become easy to control. Trust becomes a weapon turned inward. The same dynamic exists today. Corporations build empires not through violence, but through trust, the illusion of authenticity, reliability, and care. Consumers believe the smiling faces, the humanistic slogans, the "we value you" mantras. Yet behind every message lies an algorithm trained to extract loyalty and profit. It's the same pattern, the human need for trust, exploited at scale. Every age has its Brutus, its Machiavelli, its silent Cold War. The names and methods change, but the core remains. Trust creates order, betrayal restores balance. Power doesn't destroy trust. It feeds on it, consumes it, and leaves behind only the memory of what once felt safe. When we study the ruins of fallen empires, we often look for signs of corruption, greed, or external threat. But those are only symptoms. The real cause, the invisible fracture, is always the same: misplaced faith. Betrayal is not chaos. It is the natural conclusion of blind trust in systems that were never built to protect us. In every empire that fell, trust was the first casualty and the last illusion to die. Betrayal is not a wound to the heart, it's an earthquake in the mind. It shatters the quiet architecture of safety we spend years building. One moment, the world makes sense. The next, it becomes unrecognizable. The person who once felt like home now feels like danger. And the cruelest part is not what they took from you, it's what they made you lose within yourself. Psychologists call it psychic death, a collapse of identity. When someone betrays you, they don't just break a promise, they dismantle the foundation of your emotional reality. Trust is what organizes our perception of safety. It tells the brain, this person is safe, this space is secure. When that trust is destroyed, the brain doesn't know where to stand anymore. The world no longer feels coherent. Every memory becomes contaminated by doubt. Every moment of kindness becomes a possible manipulation in disguise. The trauma of betrayal is so deep because it is personalized violence. It is not random, like an accident or disaster. It's intimate. It comes from someone who had access to your vulnerabilities, someone you invited into the sacred space of your mind. That's why the pain feels existential. It's not just sadness, it's disorientation. It's not just anger, it's identity loss. Neuroscience shows that betrayal activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The same regions that light up when we are burned or cut flare alive when trust is broken. The body reacts as if it has been attacked, because it has. The difference is that the wound is invisible, and so it festers. People begin to doubt not just others, but themselves. How could I not see it? How did I let this happen? Self-blame becomes the quiet echo of every sleepless night. Carl Jung would have called this the moment of confrontation with the shadow, the dark mirror where we face not only the one who betrayed us, but the part of ourselves that allowed it. We begin to see how our need for safety, love, and belonging blinded us. The mind wages a silent war between what it believed and what it knows now. That war is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Two truths that cannot coexist, the person you loved and the person who destroyed you. This is why betrayal often leads to a complete psychological unraveling. The betrayed individual doesn't simply grieve the relationship, they grieve the version of themselves that existed inside it. It feels like the death of innocence, the loss of that naive belief that love, loyalty, or goodness can protect us from harm. And yet, hidden within that collapse is a quiet possibility, the seed of transformation. Because once the illusion burns away, what remains is truth. Painful, raw, and unfiltered, but real. For the first time, you begin to see not just others, but yourself, without the veil of idealization. So, if trust can destroy, can it also heal? Perhaps that's the paradox of the human heart. The very thing that makes us vulnerable enough to be betrayed is also what allows us to rebuild. But before that healing begins, one must first stand in the ruins and face the silence that betrayal leaves behind. Betrayal, when first experienced, feels like annihilation. It burns everything that once felt safe: trust, certainty, love, and even the illusion of control. But hidden beneath that devastation lies an alchemy of the soul. Because betrayal, when endured, becomes the fire through which a person is remade. What dies in betrayal is not your goodness, but your blindness. And what is born is something far rarer: awareness. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the moment when the false layers of identity are stripped away, forcing the individual to meet their authentic self. Pain is not the punishment, but the path. The moment you are betrayed, you are presented with a brutal kind of truth, that no one outside of you can be the foundation of your peace. Every illusion that once comforted you must now be surrendered. The illusion that love guarantees loyalty, that goodness ensures safety, that trust means control. What remains after those illusions fall is what's real. The journey of rebirth begins when you stop asking why they did it and start asking what it revealed. Betrayal exposes the limits of projection, how we see people not as they are, but as we need them to be. The manipulator's power thrives in that gap, between perception and reality. But once the veil lifts, you begin to see differently. Discernment replaces naivety. Clarity replaces attachment. You stop idealizing others and start respecting your own intuition. The paradox of recovery is that trust must return, but in a different form. Not as blind faith in others, but as deep confidence in yourself. When you no longer outsource your worth, no one can manipulate you with approval or affection. You can love without dependency. You can forgive without forgetting. You can walk away without breaking. This is not cynicism, it's sovereignty, the art of keeping your heart open without surrendering your power. Jung believed that the soul evolves through confrontation, that the self cannot emerge until the ego dies. Betrayal serves as that death, the crucifixion of innocence. But every crucifixion carries within it the promise of resurrection. When you rise again, you no longer seek people who complete you. You attract those who meet you. You no longer beg for loyalty. You embody it. The world will never stop producing deceivers, pretenders, and opportunists. But once you've walked through the fire of betrayal, you become untouchable in a different way. Not because you trust less, but because you see more. The light you carry afterward isn't naive, it's earned. Those who betray you give you a strange kind of gift, the death of your naivety. And from that death, the real self is born. You begin to live not as a person waiting to be saved, but as someone who understands that no one can truly betray you once you have made peace with your own truth. That is the quiet power of rebirth, not in vengeance, not in bitterness, but in becoming unshakably whole. There was a time when betrayal wore a human face, a friend's silence, a lover's lie, a comrade's defection. But today, betrayal has evolved. It no longer hides in whispered secrets or forged alliances. It hides in screens glowing softly in our hands. The battlefield has changed, and the war for trust is now fought in algorithms, pixels, and data. In this new world, trust has become the ultimate currency, the invisible thread that binds billions of strangers together in a digital illusion of connection. Influencers sell lifestyles they don't live. Corporations manufacture empathy to sell products. Political movements package outrage as authenticity. Every like, every follow, every share is a tiny surrender, a fragment of belief handed to someone or something we do not truly know. We live in an age of engineered intimacy. What once required years of human interaction can now be simulated in seconds. You feel close to someone who speaks into a camera because the lens mimics eye contact. You feel understood because an algorithm has studied your habits, your fears, your deepest curiosities. You are not connecting, you are being profiled. This is the psychology of parasocial trust. The illusion that we know someone because they let us into fragments of their curated existence. We project authenticity where there is strategy. We sense vulnerability where there is marketing. And when the mask slips, when another digital idol is exposed, we feel betrayed, but by then, the damage is done. The emotional transaction has already occurred. Jung once said that every era must confront its own form of the shadow. Ours is technological, the shadow of simulated sincerity. We are seduced not by truth, but by the feeling of truth. The digital world offers comfort in exchange for control, familiarity in exchange for freedom. And we accept the trade willingly, because it feels safe. But here lies the quiet horror. We no longer give our trust to people, we give it to illusions with profile pictures. Our loyalty belongs not to human beings, but to algorithms trained to imitate them. In seeking connection, we have built systems that understand our emotions better than we do, and use that knowledge not to heal us, but to own us. Trust, once sacred, is now for sale. And in this new age, betrayal no longer requires intent. It only requires belief. When the noise fades and the dust of betrayal settles, something remarkable remains, the quiet ache of trust that refuses to die. No matter how many times we are deceived, we continue to believe. We rebuild. We open our hearts again. Because beneath all the cynicism, all the scars, lies a truth we cannot escape. To trust is to live. Humanity is built on fragile faith, in one another, in the world, in meaning itself. Every act of creation, every relationship, every revolution begins with trust. It is the invisible force that allows love to bloom, societies to function, and souls to evolve. Yet, it is also the same force that makes us vulnerable, the reason we can be hurt so deeply. That duality is not a flaw of trust, it is its essence. Jung believed that all suffering points toward consciousness, that betrayal, heartbreak, and loss are not merely tragedies, but initiations, rites of passage that strip away illusion. When we are betrayed, it is not only our faith in others that breaks, but the false images we had of ourselves. The naive parts that believed love meant safety. The childish hope that goodness always guarantees loyalty. In their death, something wiser is born, a trust that is no longer blind, but aware. True wisdom is not to stop trusting, but to see while trusting. To recognize the difference between faith and fantasy, connection and control, love and dependency. Conscious trust is not built on perfection or guarantees, it's built on discernment. It knows that people can fail you and still be human, that systems can exploit you and still reflect the shadows within you. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." The same is true for trust. Until we bring awareness to what drives our loyalty, it will continue to betray us, not because others are deceitful, but because we are blind to our own projections. Perhaps betrayal was never the true villain. It was the mirror, forcing us to see what we refuse to acknowledge. And so, when trust becomes truth, it no longer needs guarantees. It simply is. Sometimes, the greatest betrayal is not what they did to you, but what you refuse to see.